Hey, what's going on?
Too much. How
Good.
you doing, bud?
I'm doing. Hey, man, I'm doing great. Doing great. Thanks for hopping on today.
Absolutely.
Um, you've got quite the setup going there as well, man. You know what? I always appreciate someone else with a nice mic.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate all the colorfulness that you have behind you. It's fun to look at.
You know what? It's one of those where it's like when the lights are low, you know, when there's no sunlight and the lights are low, it looks magical. But it's like it's like a concert hall. You turn once you turn the lights on, you're like, oh, it's not nearly um, as cool as it was with the band was on. Um,
Absolutely.
But man, I appreciate you stopping by today. I was telling chat a little bit a second ago around, around this idea of, as businesses are moving into Web3, and really in the context of traditional businesses, when they're trying to rethink the consumer, they have to, right? Because you're not like, you know, what is the line from, is it the interview or something with where they try to get a job at Google? He's like, just give me a line and I'll cram product down the customer's throat. Like that doesn't really work anymore. And so yeah, would love to chat through that some with you, but like, would love for you to kick it off like a little bit of background on you, a little bit of background on
Yeah,
Lemonade.
absolutely. Well, I'll just give a quick one. I'm Trevor Dudeck. I'm our CEO here at Lemonade. We have an amazing team of strategists and content creators and just best people in the world from my perspective that I get to work with every day. And we, at the end of the day, are a full service advertising agency. So we partner with brands, partner with startups in Web3, Web2, everyone and anyone really looking to solve marketing challenges, right? Kind of solve that problem you're talking about of like, okay, how do we communicate with our customer better? How do we release this next product, right? How do we do it in a way that engages our target audience, that is on brand? Sometimes we have to develop that brand if it's a brand new Web3 company,
Mm-hmm.
and all of that from scratch in 0 to 60 in a very short period of time. So, we kind of come in at various stages depending on what companies need and get to be that objective party. So our job is a little bit easier in that sense, where we get to kind of see everything you've done so far and how we can amplify it and improve upon it and
I see.
partner for the long term.
Awesome. All right. So you've got some perspective on this then. You've got an opinion.
For
You've got an
sure.
opinion. You've got an opinion on what it means to rethink the consumer in the context of Web3. So, yeah, so let's dive right in. So, the thing that I wanted to ask, or that I always think about, is that I was like slightly ranting on this before you got on, but it is this idea that, you know, uh, traditional companies, when you're talking to them, right, they come from a world where like they're generating revenue like clockwork, right? They know because they're producing something physical that thing is either one going to be consumed if it's a perishable or food or whatever it might be, and two that it's going to degrade and go out over time, a la planned obsolescence, which is like an entire rant track that I have on its own. I heard it on a podcast the other day about how like 7 guys basically went to Geneva and met around the first time ever, which was the light bulb, and they were like, these things are lasting too long, yada yada yada. But so when you're talking to a company whose entire like revenue model is based off of cramming product down people's throat and then having them just rebuy more and more and more, when you talk to them of saying like, look, here's Web3, look, it's cool, things stay alive for forever, you know, what is the when you hear when you talk to brands generally like off the bat, right? Like what's some of the, like, is it gasp, I mean, how does that hit against their, lizard brain that this is way different?
It varies, obviously, there's folks who kind of get it a little bit more, and I think also to the amount of kind of passion you have for just sort of the future and kind of the next evolution of things is a big part of that. We're talking with some pretty big brands right now who have admittedly sort of seen themselves go through that journey of web 2 e-commerce, and being like slow to that party and realizing like, okay, well, don't necessarily know everything we need to know yet about web 3, and we know we need help to get there. that's where folks like you and us and all the great people in the space come in. But we do know we don't want to be behind, and we don't want to be left behind
Mm-hmm.
or slow to it like we were with e-commerce, right? So that's kind of a cool place to come from. And I think what is also interesting is sometimes, and we're all guilty of this too, I think, like overcomplicating it, and they overcomplicate it a little bit because this space in general, it is a little bit tough to understand, right?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, I mean, I think like Web3 in general could use some rebranding. There's definitely a need there to simplify things in certain ways because, we talk a lot internally about the fact that um, at the end of the day, the reason that people buy your product or your service still kind of remains the same, right? So whether it's physical or digital or phygital, the reason I buy a piece of fashion is to express or represent myself. The reason I'm
Mm-hmm.
interested in a collectible is, it's rare and it's increasing in value. There's these kind of tried and true reasons behind things and motivators for your consumer, whatever you may be doing and whoever you may be speaking to. And for a large part, that doesn't necessarily change in Web3 or in the metaverse. It is about kind of making sure you communicate that properly. And in a lot of ways, make sure that you're educating the consumer along the way of why we're doing this. Like the why is so important and it's missing. And oftentimes there's a great offer, a great opportunity that's just not properly delivered and packaged, and it can kind of get missed, right? I mean, I'm
Mm-hmm.
sure you knows that you kind of go down the rabbit hole and you're like, okay, this is actually really good, but you almost missed me there, right?
Sure.
Uh,
Yeah,
big
that's
picture, that's fundamental.
yeah, because I mean, I guess when you think about it from a psychological, I mean, you mentioned it there, right? Like the consumer doesn't change that much. That from a psychological perspective, like consumers are consumers. Like people love to buy, they love to purchase, they love to trade, they love to feel like they got a good deal. That is part of it. And so when you, but I mean, but there's got to be something that you've seen, right? There's a different tactic to engaging someone into whether that's engaging them to onboard them to Web3. So like you're a brand trying to convince your consumers, well, not convince them because I feel like that means it's like a scam, but you're trying to educate them into a whole new world, right? And then also like selling to consumers that are already within it. So like there's got to be some like delta there versus just like my consumer, shops at a big box store and they go and purchase, and my idea is just put it out there. Like what are some of those like different strategies that you would like offer out as like, look, when you're trying to do this, and we'll take a single use case, for example. If you were talking to a large brand and they were like, we want to start, and let's say that this brand has been around for at least 50 years, like their typical consumers are everyday people, not super crypto nerds. Like what would be like a couple, like two advice points that you would give them before they started down this or started offering it to their consumers?
Yeah, I think I think the first step is, um, and you can take your time with this, but exploring the actual problem you think you can solve, and that ideally the technology is actually helping you solve.
Mm-hmm.
If you can connect that and you can explain that to people in a way that is simple and kind of everyone can relate to, how is this going to make my life better? How is this going to improve my banking experience, or how am I going to get the thing I want better, or how is my life going to be enriched because of this? Again, those like basic motivators and psychological factors that drive us all to buy and to also buy into brand.
Mm-hmm.
I think that if you can start out with that, focus on utility as much as possible, and we see the space kind of evolving towards more utility, right? That's going to be a big, just kind of foundational thing that will ground you, and will allow you to not have to battle a lot of the competition where everyone has sort of got a similar version of the same thing. And it's just like, okay, do I like their shiny object versus that shiny object, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's just kind of a lot of that right now. And I think if you can come back to the fundamentals of what is the problem you're solving, and how does this improve my whatever, right, life
Mm-hmm.
experience, um, that's going to just it's going to remove so many issues along the way.
Mm-hmm.
So I think start there, figure that out, try to have a real problem you're solving. And then I think number two is, we as marketers, I think, understand the concept of building community, and we all talk about that. But I think that is probably one of the biggest differences about this space, is that consumers are seeing more value in kind of slowly getting it enriched with that community offering, not necessarily from the brand, right, but from what they get from just participating, being a part of something. And again, that's a fundamental like reward, like dopamine hit,
Mm-hmm.
that we can play with, if we take the time to do it. So I come back to, so many people are trying to rush to these projects and to rush into the space because there's this kind of FOMO, you've sold yourself. But I do think people need to slow down a little bit, right?
Sure.
And if they can do that, and they can focus on the fact that building a really rewarding community that is going to hold your hand along the way,
Mm-hmm.
really showcase that ideal utility that I was talking about earlier, is like point number one, and kind of get you bought into the bigger intangible that you're buying into. If you buy that thing, then you've done two really really important pieces of the puzzle that are going to be fundamental to succeeding in this space. I know those sound really basic in a way, but they're also like really hard,
Yeah.
to execute well. I always go back to Gary Vee's project, because VeeFriends just onboarded thousands of people who knew nothing about Web3 for the most
Mm-hmm.
part. And I think they did that by slowly over time educating that community, walking them through it, hand holding them. And that step's starting to get missed a lot,
Mm-hmm.
because people are kind of assuming like, okay, I'll just target the savvy folks and we'll be good to go. Enough people know what it is now, but you and I know that that's a very small percentage of the population. And if we all just keep going after that same liquidity pool, we're not going to
Yeah.
get anywhere in terms of
No,
adoption.
that's true. Yeah, I mean, so you mentioned a great point, right? And I have very conflicting views on this, right? So the idea of, and I would challenge you a little bit on one of these, is that it's the community aspect, right? Like there's, I feel like a lot of like I would say Web3 native projects rely on community as a value add because they don't offer much more outside of that.
Yeah.
And so, but if you look at it from the flip side of a large brand where you have an established consumer base or customer base, it might be less important, the community side, as more, but more important to how do you amplify the value of what you already have. And the reason that I bring that up is because there's some and I'm gonna like butcher the shit out of this, but like there's some rule, right, that people can only maintain like 7 close relationships at like any one point in time. And I'm like I feel like it's very close to like, but is there this saturation point where it's like I don't care about the community, man, like I don't want to be in Discord, I just want to like have this extra whatever it is. So I would put the question to you, this is that, do you think an existing business can offer a NFT, well, I don't want to say NFT because then it just sounds like PFP kind of thing, but do you think they can have a Web3 offering without community?
And this is
Hot
good.
take.
Yeah, no, it's a good pushback, because I feel like I'm also thinking about community in like a very broad sense, because we're kind of, we work with both Web2 and Web3 brands, and to your point, it is different, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I see the same thing. If you're kind of a native Web3 company, you're focusing heavily on that community aspect, and in some ways too much, right? It's like you said, a little too lopsided there. And if you're a big brand, you can also make the mistake of just assuming you've got too much built-in, so much built-in brand equity that you don't need to do enough of that.
Right.
I think that the point number one is the more important point, which is if you actually have something that is, you know, delivering utility or solving a problem, right? And it doesn't have to be like a world problem, it doesn't
Mm-hmm.
have to be that every single thing out there is, making the planet greener. I mean, we all have these big, lofty goals as brands, and that's great. But you don't have to set out with that and pigeonhole yourself to trying to come up with the next iPhone or whatever it is.
Sure.
But you can just give someone that reward for their time, for their attention, and communicate that properly. Because I think the communication part of the community is almost the more important piece of it, not just the noise of there's a lot of people here doing things, talking to each other. That's great for people who want to spend time there. But the brands need to spend time educating, informing, why are we doing this? Why is this a good addition to our existing product or service? Is it solving a challenge or problem? Is there a reason why long term, even if we don't have everything figured out, we do feel like this is going to be a fundamental part of our industry or our business? Because I think
Mm-hmm.
we are, as like consumers, rewarding brands for being honest about that and
Yeah.
saying like, hey, I don't have everything figured out. I don't know exactly what the metaverse is going to look like in a few years. I don't know all these things, but we are taking the proper steps. We're trying to be responsible as stewards of your hard-earned money with whatever product or service we're selling you,
Mm-hmm.
and that goes a long way. But it's easy to miss that kind of fundamental ongoing communication.
Yeah, and that reward for transparency, I think, is like a very interesting point to make, right? That, and we do have some questions from chat that I'll get to in 2 seconds, but something that's so interesting, and so I one of my friends named Richard Walker one time, he is now I think blockchain principal at Bain, but was at Deloitte. Um, had said about businesses adopting or moving into Web3 is that one of the first things they need to do as an organization is like understand that it's okay to fail, right? And that mentality of that, if you've been around for 80 years and you're still here and cooking and kicking, like odds are you're very predictive and like about how your new products are going to hit. You're probably down within a few points on your share prices, know what your revenue is going to be. But when you're going into this, you don't, right? And how to change your messaging, not just internally, but also to customers, that idea of transparency, that we're trying something new, actually does go a long way when people are like, okay, like as long as you told me, like,
Yeah,
that's cool. And so that is something that you push pretty hard, right?
absolutely. And I think for it seems to be getting better, but I feel like, you know, for a while there, like we were even getting approached for, we talked to like 20 plus companies a week. And, so many companies that are launching something, whether they're native or new brand, or sorry, legacy brand or they're a native blockchain company. So many are kind of like, rushing to do this yesterday and kind of pushing things forward very quickly,
Yep.
which again I think is part of the problem. But the other part is like it is easy to kind of drink your own Kool-Aid, like you're kind of saying. I feel like,
Mm-hmm.
and assume that you've kind of had these successes, you've won for so long, so you don't really know what it feels like to lose. You don't really want to know what it feels like. But if you kind of reframe that to like it's not losing, it's learning, and we can do it together because it's a journey that we want to go on as a brand. Because
Right.
ultimately, what's at the end of it is something that's better for you as a consumer, or
Mm-hmm.
it's going to fundamentally improve your experience. That's really important. And I think that if if you can go into it with those kind of walls taken down a little bit, as you're saying, you'll be good. But also, I think that transparency piece of it is really interesting because what I was trying to say is that for a while there, we were getting approached with people who wanted to launch stuff, but didn't want to really say who was behind the project. And,
Mm,
I think that's
crafty.
what's so ironic about like,
Yeah.
what Web3 is trying to solve and how many projects kind of don't want to be doxed and be, have us be familiar with who's behind it. But now consumers are getting a little smarter. They're like, okay, there's a business behind this, and I have to trust that people can run the business
Yeah.
and deliver the product. And that's what I'm really excited to see. Is it does seem like as consumers, we've gotten smarter about that and asking the right questions, and kind of forced folks who get into the space to just table stakes,
Mm-hmm.
be transparent about that. But to your point, in that transparency can be that we don't have it all figured out. It's okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, dude, I've got like a hard stance, which might be, I should say hard stance, more of a hot take. That if you're a
Yeah,
project and you're not willing to dox yourself, like I'm immediately suspect of what this is,
yeah,
right?
I
Like,
100% agree.
yeah, I mean, unless I mean, I think that, yeah, I mean, with what's all happened, and this is not creativity's fault or anything like that, but yeah, it does become a little sketchy. But and I'm curious too that if you're when you're looking at Web3 from really from a marketing lens, right? And if you're a company, and again, a big company that already maybe has a marketing department, and they're like, great, we want to move into Web3. They're used to operating with probably like a very core set of suite or tools that are very attuned to like existing Web2 websites, like coupon scanning. I don't know, some of those. Like when you're operating right in your business and looking to do marketing with Web3, like are you limited like as a marketer because there's not as many tools out there, or that like you can't access the same data, or like you can't get that same consumer profile as you typically would? And like is it different? Like is it different trying to track metrics?
It is. And I think that is part of the challenge too. There's more being built every day. Things are growing and expanding there, which is exciting. But it's just like when Web2 started, and we didn't have all the tools, and didn't have everything at our disposal to figure it out, right? But we do, right? Innovation will find a way, and that's kind of the exciting part, and that part of like accepting that this is a bit of a journey that you're going to go on. But it is definitely something that for a big organization you have to prepare everybody
Yep.
going into something and say, okay, we're not going to have like this 360 dashboard where everything's going to be trackable. We're not necessarily going to be able to target people in the same way, which some of that's already started even before, Web3 stuff, right? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, Facebook and iPhone restriction targeting, all those things were kind of coming anyways, right? So I think it kind of pulls you back to what we were talking about earlier, which is fundamentally you still have to work on the basics of like what are we solving for people, how are
Mm-hmm.
we communicating that, and driving something through to create an emotional connection, right? And that's still something a lot of brands miss. So I think if you can find some magic there, you can really produce anything you want. You can really create any experience you want, because you'll go through it and you'll realize if I don't have good answers to those things, it's not ready yet, right? I'm not there yet, but that's okay, right? And I think that's part of the other thing you have to get comfortable with
Yeah.
is if you don't have the good answers for it, then keep
Keep trying.
yeah.
Yeah, and that's like the really tough part, right? And I think that the difference is, especially when you see companies within Web3 and digital assets like rush to market before it's out there, I think it's so enticing for them to do because the capital cost or capital expenditure is so low, right? Like it's not like I'm going to go manufacture a new part out of China, and then like now I'm thinking about like I got to invest in molds, and I've got to create I have to have find a factory, I've got to get it across here, I got to find distribution channel. Yeah, like it's so much more. It's so easy to just push the button as a business and be like, boom, we have NFTs at 99.9% margin. Our
Right.
shareholders fucking love this. right? And that, I feel like that's the dangerous part of this, is that it seems, I think smart brands are aware of that, but for brands in general, that's the dangerous part, right? The drug is so easy to access, but it can have like severe downside consequences if you don't, like you're saying, think about what is the problem you're solving, what is the value they're actually giving back. Because if not, boy, you're going to have a rough go at it from the media, looking like a bunch of scam artists.
Yeah, the cost, if you think and this goes back to the like waiting, right, and rushing. So like if you think the cost of taking your time is too high, wait till you get the bill for rushing it.
Mm.
You know, like
There's a little, yeah.
that's gonna be a big one, especially if you're a legacy brand.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where like I feel like every legacy brand has this opportunity right now to see that this is going to touch what they do indefinitely, like no matter what. I know we believe that, right? I think that none, I would assume, I don't put words in your mouth, but I feel like that's what a lot of us believe. And that's the first part. That's great. But then just start to really think about it like you would anything else. Like you said, if you're going to roll out a product, you're going to create molds, you're going to do all these things, approach it a little bit more methodically like
Mm-hmm.
that. And in there, you'll realize there are new things to figure out. There are new ways that we have to track and measure. But there's a lot of opportunity, and getting involved now is the chance to have that kind of unfair advantage, right? Where it's not okay, I can make some quick money right now because that cost is so high. It's getting involved in it now in the right way as a legacy brand means that I have, this exponential opportunity and exponential returns that I can see over time. And that's not even a long period of time, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
3, 4, 5 years maybe, because I've started down this path properly. And when everyone else is sort of finally getting their boards, on board with this, in a few years, you won't be late to the game the way that a lot of people were late to Web 2.
Sure. Yeah, that's a lot where, which is again, yeah, that theme we heard like earlier today, is that idea of there's so many parallels between like the Web 2 adoption and the Web 3 adoption, of that, there's kind of like the .com boom, those people that get scared and then don't want to do it, but those that stick through it and really think about what it means to be long term are the ones that you look at 5 years after the .com boom and you're like, holy shit, they're rolling. They're very, very successful. They've created this new, they've adopted, they became technical. I feel like for such a long time, the whole like term like digital first company was like toted around everywhere, and it's kind of like lost some of that now, right? I mean, it's because every company is like, there's not
I remember
digital.
working at a newspaper as a sales job earlier in my career, and yep, I remember when it was digital first, and all of a sudden it all changed. And
Yeah, digital
yeah,
first and digital transformation. Ooh.
exactly.
But man, thank you so much for stopping by today. I very, very much appreciate it. And if people want to follow you on any social medias or anything like that, where should we check you out at?
I'm just at Trevor Dudeck on pretty much everything. So hit me up on LinkedIn, and primarily LinkedIn, Twitter too. But yeah, you can find everything linked here. So
Awesome, man. Well, thank you so much, brother. I appreciate it.
awesome. Take care, buddy.
Later, dude.